Okay, in this tutorial we're continuing to model the phone. The last tutorial just focused on creating the main body of the phone and the top corner of the metal area, which we will now finish working on. And the first thing we'll need to do is have a go at mirroring this geometry down the side of the phone. So I'll select this geometry, and this is the metal outer corner of the phone here, and go to Mesh, Mirror Geometry, click on the options box, and I know it needs to be in the +Z axis from this down there, and hit mirror. It's two problems. It's obviously much too small, and it's still two entirely separate pieces of geometry. So what I'll do, I'll double click on the bottom piece of geometry, hit W, and move it all the way down to the bottom. I might need to go to see the image plane to make sure, or the top view, to make sure that I've aligned it so that this gap here is exactly the same as this gap here. If you don't do it exactly right, it'll look pretty bad. So, but that's a good guess, and that's pretty much right. So now we can bridge these together, and all we've got to do, I'm going to go to the top view just to make it easier. I'll go to edge mode and select all these edges, and shift to deselect all the edges I don't want, and just leave the edges that are facing each other, and hit bridge. Okay, and now we should have something that looks like this. Now we're going to come to the part of our phone here where we need to start adding some holes and stuff. What we'll do, we need to have another image plane so that we can start modeling it against the base of the phone that we can see here. So I'm going to go to my layers channel box here, and the background image plane is currently on its own layer set to a reference. I need to take the R off so that we can see what's going on. I've actually just pressed Control D on the geometry, and I can move it about, but let's just hit E, and if you hold down J for rotating, I've set my rotate to 45 degree increments. If you need to change this, if you're at uni and the computer's reset every week, you'll just need to double click on your rotate option, check discrete rotate, type in 45 or 90. I like 45, and uncheck it, and then uncheck it again so it goes grey. It was probably 15 beforehand, and then close it down. Now when you hit J and rotate stuff, so hold down J beforehand, then hit rotate, it just snaps like that. And now I know it's at 90 degrees. I'll go to my sort of front view here, and then just move it up so I can see this. In fact, I might just move this over like that as well. Okay, if you really want to be precise, you can move your pivot if you want. Just hit insert, and then just move your pivot somewhere where you might want to see it. Like so, now I can zoom in. So I've hit insert twice there, once to move the pivot, once again to go back to normal. And I can move the image plane down. I'm just focusing on this corner here to make sure that I line the image plane up perfectly with that corner, and that's just about right now. And obviously we can see the geometry here that's selected. Now just to double check we're in the right view, I'm going to select a face, go back to 3D view, and what we think, and just make sure that what we think is the bottom and not the top. So that's fine. So before we do anything, I'm going to add some cylinders to use as little markers or reference cylinders here to mark out where the speakers are going to go. So I'm going to go to my front view. I'm going to create some cylinders. I'll just create one to start with. I need to just jump to 3D view to give it some depth. It's probably popped up in the middle of your grid, so I'm going to have to hit 4, turn off my background reference images here just by hitting the V on their layer, and move that back. There you go. It doesn't really matter if this has depth or not, but I just need to make sure it's moved towards the camera there. So yeah, it would have done it in the middle of your grid. Hit 4 to go to wireframe view and move it away. And then I'll go to the front view and put these reference images back on and move it up here. I would also like to see the wireframe on shaded. So I can't see the holes at the top, but I can see these ones. I'm going to resize it down so it's just about the right size. Actually, I'm going to make it just about the size as the you can see there's little highlights around the edge there that are very pixelated. I want it to be just about the same size as those. And I will then go to my 3D view, just hit 5 so I can see everything shaded again. And yeah, that's pulled out far enough. I'll need to click on the attribute editor for that object and go to poly cylinder 1 and change the subdivisions from 20 to 8, so it should look like this. I will then go back to my front view like this, and I will have a go at duplicating it. I want to see the holes just above here without moving my geometry, so I can go to shading and just hit X-ray, and it will, just in this view, put your work to slightly transparent, which is very useful. So that was just under shading, and then check X-ray. You might need to uncheck it later on when you're finished with this, but I'm going to put it on X-ray for a second and hit Control D and move this up there. While we have this circle, I'll also duplicate it to, just so we can mark out the circle for the edge of this part here as well. So because we're going to smooth this out later on, it's not really a big issue that this only has 8 sides. That's really not a problem. So I'm just going to make that the size of the bevel, so that will do. And I might as well just have, while we're here, just duplicate one and use it for the headphone jack as well. So that will do. So we've got that. Next, let's assign all of these cylinders that we've just made to a new layer. Just make sure you just jump to a 3D view. Just make sure you've got all of the cylinders that you've just made and that you've snapped them. You're going to assign them to another new layer, and we're going to change that to a T for template, making sure our reference images are an R for reference. While I'm here, I'm going to rename these to reference and double click on the text and change that to cylinders, and that'll be fine. So jumping back to our bottom view, we can probably turn off X-ray on shaded now. The other shortcut for it is here, so I'm going to click on that, and we can have a go at adding some more edge loops. Now there's going to be some edge loops we need to add to the entire geometry. So I'm going to add one at the top of the cylinder, one at the bottom of the cylinder, and one along the center, and that should really be all that we need. The others could be vertical. I also didn't mention we are going to be mirroring this top edge down, so any work we do up here will be mirrored later on as well. So just double check that the bottom edge of your phone here is somewhere between these two holes. What I'm going to do is just I'm actually going to go and select these faces here and just hit 4 to make sure I've done it. Yeah, that's fine. I'm just going to move these down just to there. In fact, let's just jump to my 3D view, make sure I have got all the faces around the entire phone for this. Just give them a bit of a wobble. Yeah, that's everything. So I'm going to move them just down to, so that they're in the middle between those two circles. We can refine it later, and I have obviously moved my edge now, so double click on that edge loop and move it back to the base of your circle, and now we are free to go ahead and add some more edge loops. So we can see that there's going to be a problem that will arise because this speaker hole is actually over the curve of the edge of the phone here. Whether or not that's the same with the manufacturer, I'm not sure, but because we're going to duplicate these holes, it's going to be a bit of effort to change this. So I'm actually going to leave, it's going to be easier to work with these on a flat piece of geometry and then make it curved later. So I'm just going to move these to the left and just offset everything to the left a bit, because I'm not being too accurate here, and that'll be fine. So I've moved these to the left a bit, making sure that they are on a piece of geometry that's completely flat, and I can see that this is now on something that's completely flat, which is great. Well, I'll put these back to reference again, and I will go ahead and add an edge loop. Just jump to my front view again, I just put one in so it's about the same distance on the left as it is from the right. And what we're going to do next might be a bit destructive, so I'm going to duplicate the outer part of the phone, just move it to the right a bit and out of the way, just in case something goes wrong. Now what I'll do is add 2 more vertical edge loops here, just to mark out the right hand side. It's important that you do have something that looks like this, so you do have these faces here before you get to these ones here, okay? And what we can do next is I'm going to duplicate this geometry again, because this is getting perfect. In fact, I can delete that one. So now this geometry has the right number of edge loops, and this should work. So I can now, on this geometry here, go ahead and delete everything except I'll shift select this entire loop here. So just show you in the 3D view, I've selected the entire phone. I've hit 4, but I have left a gap that goes around the entire phone that we can then bridge later on. So I'll turn the reference off just so you can see what's going on here. I've unselected that. It's really important that you try and do the same as well. Okay, and then I'll hit delete. And it's okay because we've still got this on the top there that we can line up again later. It looks like I've forgotten to select a face there, so delete that too. So 3D view, I should just be left with something that looks like this. Before I do that, I have to have one more edge loop along the middle. That's it. And now I can go and select these 4 vertices along the outside, hit R for resize, and just pull them in to there. And now we've got what would be a perfect circle when we hit the 3 smooth command. So let's move the other geometry back down into place. I might want to do this in the 3D view. You can do this a couple of ways. I can just align the camera so I can see the pivot and make sure it's lined up with the piece that we just cut out, but that's not very accurate, so I'm just going to do it in the side view here, in the front view, and that's about right. Again, I can use the reference image as well for this, but I can see it's still not perfectly lined up along the bottom there. So just center pivot on that. But I probably should have just used isolate select instead of moving it out of the way. That's better. So make sure that's perfectly lined up with your the piece that you just cut out. And we're going to actually need to select on this main piece of geometry the faces to delete. This is a really good tip. If you select a face, shift, double click next to it, and then if you hit the shift and then just above to the top right of your space bar, you've got a comma and full stop. Just hit those. Obviously there's a backwards and a forwards arrow, so if you hit the forwards arrow, it should increase your selection amount. So you can do this to anything. Select any ring of geometry or of faces, and then hit that shift and full stop, or shift and the right arrow, and it should increase your geometry like this. I want to do it to this vertical set here, so it's double click, shift, right, and then hit delete, and it will leave us with the geometry underneath there, which I am just going to get the edges. So I've double clicked on the edges for it, and I'm just going to resize them in a bit because I do need a small gap for when we bridge together. So you should have your geometry like this, and then this piece is separate. Just select, before we start to combine anything, I'll need to actually delete all of this stuff over here. So select that, hit delete. So now you should just have your main body of the phone and this piece here, which you're then free to center pivot. Okay, so before we duplicate these holes, I need to turn the cylinders off. I actually need to create the hole. So I'm going to select these 4 faces here. I'm going to hit delete, and then I'll select the edges on the inside by double clicking on these edges here. Hit extrude, snap to grid button before I pull anything out, and then get these. So click on a cube on the top and then click on a cube in the center to resize down. And I need to have a very, very small bevel that I have to again create manually, just a bit here. So just as small as you can really get. Move it in just a tiny bit. Hit G, which should extrude again. Hit that snap to grid button, and then again resize one more time. Just make it, then we can push them into the phone like that. Hit F to focus. G to extrude again. Or you could use the bevel command, it's up to you. I'm just going to resize this a tiny bit and then hit G, snap to grid and push it inside the phone there, and just I'm going to select these faces like this, whoops, shift, full stop right arrow thing, and then I could probably just go to smooth edges, and I could probably double click my way around there, and again smooth edges. If you don't have the smooth edges, it's in normals, soften edge, and it should look quite nice now. Now we are free to duplicate this, so we could set up a duplicate special command, but I really don't mind, so I'm just going to sort of hold down shift and duplicate those like that. Try and just keep it as accurate as possible, but this will be fine. And let's do that one more time. Okay. Again, obviously duplicate special would allow us to keep it equal distance, but that's fine. Now I need to select all of these and the body of the phone itself, hit combine. If you haven't got it on your shelf, it's mesh and combine. What we'll do now is start to bridge these faces back together again. So I have to do this from the front view very carefully. So what we have to watch out for is, turn the reference off for a minute, is if we start selecting faces or edges down here, we are going to start selecting stuff at the top as well. So what we need to do is isolate select only part of the phone. So if we select pretty much just these faces down here in face mode, and then go to isolate select, we'll be left with this, and we know the rest of the phone's there, but we can now no longer select it. Actually, I need to do it for, or if you want to do it in your front view, you'd have to do the same thing again. So I will just again select all these faces, go to the front view, and again just hit isolate select. This is different for different views, remember, so it won't apply to all views at the same time. So I'm now ready to go ahead and bridge this geometry here, remembering we can only do one section at a time. So I will start off by selecting the bottommost edge and then the topmost edge here, double clicking to connect all the way between them. Same for the opposite side. Click on the face at the top, shift, double click to the face at the bottom. It's important that you select equal numbers each time, and then go ahead and press bridge. And same for the next one. But once you've hit bridge once, you can just hit G. So select your way along there and just hit G. Obviously to pan along, it's just Alt and middle click, and that should be fine. Okay, and so that's all now bridged together, and if we hit 3, you should see how nice that looks, even though it's only got 8 sides. So what we need to do now is bring our reference image back up. So we need to unclick from the isolate select so we can see everything else, and same with our perspective view if we have it activated, which we don't. And down here as well, uncheck the isolated bit from there, and we can put our reference image back up. So what we're going to do now is extrude this edge here. So 3D view, extrude along. I need to change that back to 1, and just extrude this edge here. So make sure to show it 4. Yeah. So go ahead and hit extrude, and you probably just snap to the grid for this as well. And I'm going to extrude my way along until I hit the charging port here, which starts there. So this is the outermost part of the charging port. Again, I am going to isolate select this object. So if I shift click on the reference layer as well, I like to be able to see that. Hit isolate select on that. So that's fine now. So I don't really mind that the speaker holes aren't lined up perfectly, but what we need to do now is select. We can go ahead, go into vertex mode, and we can just carefully line these vertices up to the charging port there. And I'm going to use this vertex here to mark out the top point, and I'll move them all to the left at the same time to make sure it's all lined up. So if that one goes to there, I can then move this one around to there. Okay, and then I'm going to select the edges on the top part here, and then hit it. Whoops, Just select these edges on the top, hit extrude. Again, snap to grid, use that red arrow, move them to the left. Okay. And so it should look like this now. And I'm going to just select these vertices in the middle and resize them so they are completely flat against the camera like that, which means we can mirror them quite easily later on. So the geometry should be looking like this now, and we should be ready to flip over the minus y-axis. So I'm going to turn off the reference images for this and go to just center pivot on that, and then just let's save our work quick. So let's go to mesh, mirror geometry, options box over the minus y-axis in my case anyway, and hit mirror, uncheck merge with original. Okay, and it should look like that. So let's just check with our reference how that looks. Yeah, and that's pretty much spot on. Luckily mine was the correct height. If yours is slightly more or less, just get these vertices at the bottom and line them up where the bottom of the phone is, but mine's not too bad. Again, if you want to be really accurate with this, you could probably just go ahead and select something like that. So you've got, even the speaker holes are the same distance apart from each other, and move them like that. Okay, bottom of the speaker here could probably actually do with being moved up as well. Okay, so once we've mirrored it over this axis, we have to remember they are still two separate pieces of geometry. So the easiest thing to do is to double click on the faces at the bottom, hit W, move it down a bit, and then go to edge, and just again, there's only certain edges we want to do, so let's go. We could probably do it from our front view, to be honest, and just make a very careful selection around here, and then very carefully unselect, deselect all the stuff we do not want. So bridge, which is all of that there, and then we should be able to go ahead and hit bridge, and that's worked fine. We need to put our reference stuff back up now, because by moving them further apart to bridge, we have made the phone slightly too fat. So I'm just going to move them together again, and I might need to actually select those ones as well and move them up. So just try and get your phone about the right thickness again, and that should be fine. So we've done that, and that's all bridged together. Let's check the top, and that's looking good as well. So if I double click, the whole object, the whole face is selected. Now let's go ahead and mirror over the minus X axis. So to do this, I'm going to turn the reference off. Just go to mesh, mirror geometry, minus X, and hit mirror. And again, we need to remember these are two separate objects. I need to just move the whole phone over to the left anyway, because mine wasn't wide enough. If yours is too wide, you're going to need to get these vertices here and move them out of the way so it's small enough. But whoops, just double click on face to get half of the phone selected there, and move it out to the left. I have to go to my top view. I need to make sure I do this accurately and make sure that there is a similar, same size gap right there, and that's looking about right. So if you want to be really accurate, you can just hit insert, and you can move your pivot down and then hit insert again. Then you can zoom in and keep your pivot on screen and move the geometry around to something like that, and that should be fine. Okay, so back to 3D view. Now we can go ahead and select the edges in the middle. So if I just do this in the 3D view manually like this, so I'm going to select this edge here, shift, double click to there, shift, that edge there, shift, double click to there, and hit bridge. Go down to the bottom, that one to that one, that one to that one, and G over to the top. You can see here I've actually made a slight mistake. I forgot to isolate select when we were making these curved shapes here, so I was accidentally moving these vertices around up here. That's not a big problem. I'm just going to resize these to a straight line really quick, so it's a bit neater to resize those to a straight line. Go to edge, you'll have to click on that top one, shift, double click to there, opposite side, click on that edge, shift, double click to there, and hit bridge, and that should work nicely now as well. Now we're ready to go ahead and put the little bevel in there, so we're going to need a reference image up for that. And again, it's slightly off, but I know since we've mirrored it, it is actually still in the middle of our phone, so I'm going to leave that. But I'm going to hit extrude anyway, and snap to grid button and resize like this, ever so slightly like that, that'll do. And then I'm going to go back to 3D view, and I'm going to move it in slightly like that, and then hit G to extrude again, click on the little power button-y thing, and then move it directly down into there. This is because this will be a separate piece of geometry. The metal charging port will be inside of that. So while we're here, we might as well do that now. Let's be really picky and just add a couple of edge loops. Whoops, a couple of edge loops here, so that when we smooth shade it, smooth preview it, it looks quite neat. So when we hit 3, it's got some really sharp edges there, and that's great. So 1. So just test this with 3 really quick, and let's have a look how it looks deselected. So what we might need to do is try and move some of these other points around a bit, because it looks like it's a bit too angular at the moment. That's just because there's so many vertices in here, so many edges in here, it does get quite sharp. You have to be very careful when you're editing geometry in a smooth preview mode, because you might select something that looks like it's far away from other geometry and move it around till it's nice and smooth, and then you hit 1 and you realise you've really done some wacky stuff. So the best thing to do is select the problem areas in with 1 or hard edges and everything back on. So hit 1 on the keyboard, select everything you want, then hit 3, and then you can resize it around from there, just so you know what exactly you've been selecting, and then you should be able to get some nicer looking. But from a distance, that looks fine. So I'm happy with that. Let's go ahead, hit 1 again. I need to create the little charging port for inside of this now. So I'm going to duplicate my geometry, just move it up a bit. I'm going to select these faces on the inside here by clicking on one face, double clicking one next to it, and the whole loop should be selected. Hold down Shift and hit delete. Just turn off your references, make sure nothing else is selected, and go to center pivot and move that back down into the area here, and then just hit resize, and let's just see the reference image. What does it look like? So I'm going to just resize this slightly. You might be able to see it here. No, yeah, you can see it here. I just want it to be slightly smaller than the main part of the phone, so that will do. I'm going to go to edge, just this top edge, double click on it, extrude it towards the outside of the phone, and then we're going to hit extrude again, and without clicking on the little power button thing, I'm going to move it in a bit like this. Now, what we're doing was actually making this shape inside out, so it's gone black, which means we need to reverse the normals later. Put that to about there, hit G, just to about here, and push it down into the phone a bit like that. That should be fine. Or that, and then hit G and snap to grid and push it directly into the phone to there. I'll see how that looks later. Let's just click on it and then go to normals and click reverse, and it should no longer be black. We can also just select the whole object, press soft edges on it all. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and give these edges a bevel, so I'm just going to delete the history quick and then go to edge, double click these 2 edges there, and then go to bevel, and on the attribute editor on object mode I should see another poly bevel here, which I can reduce the fraction by a lot, and that will do. I just had 1 division on there because that's not a problem. I'll put another edge loop in there as well, and it's gone green for no reason, so I'm just going to go assign existing material Lambert 1, and that'll be fine. Again, select the whole object, click on soften edge, and that should look a bit better. So if we hit 3, it should look like this now. I might just increase the scale of that actually, so there's no gap that can be seen. So I might also want to go ahead and add a couple of edge loops here to really make sure that this shape isn't quite as curved. So same on the inside as well, just to, so when it smooth previews it should look a bit better. Yeah, that's a bit better, that'll do. So we've got the charging port. Next we need to make room for the headphone jack, which can be a bit annoying. And so the headphone jack is right here, and if we put our cylinders back on, it should be, yeah, just make sure you've got wireframe on there. And make sure you turn off isolate select and put wireframe on. Okay, I need to basically make room for these speaker holes here. So what I'll do in 3D view, okay, so what I need to do is select the only the faces, well, only these 3 last speaker hole points here. So if I select these like this, I might think it's safe. If I go to my perspective view, turn off the reference quick, I can see I've also selected all the stuff up here. So what I need to do this might get a bit confusing, but in the 3D view, perspective view, I'm going to select the whole, just the bottom area of the phone like that. So this is selected, and then going to go into the front view and hit isolate select. Now, obviously in the perspective view, it doesn't show that isolate select, but just to test that it's working, if I go along and select like a few faces here, or even everything, in the perspective view, only these faces have been selected. So I know that isolate select is indeed working in the front view. So that means that if I select these faces here, the top of the phone will not be selected, and we will not delete anything up there. So let's zoom in on our front view, and I want to delete anything to do with these 3 holes there, which is just these faces. I suppose I could grow the selection, to be honest, actually like that. So that's shift full stop and then hit delete, and just check with our 3D view that that's what's happened, and that's great. Now we can go ahead and bridge this back together again. So I'm going to just go ahead and hit isolate select in 3D view and go to edge, select the top one, shift, select my way down, whoops, shift my way across there, and same on the other side, click on that edge, shift, click your way along there and hit bridge again. Okay, and that's worked. Let's hit 1, and there we are. Okay, so now there will be room for the headphone jack. Just turn off isolate select on any of your views now before it gets too confusing. And again, because this cylinder is on the corner there, and I really can't be bothered to work out the corners today, I'm just going to move this to this empty space here. And now we're ready to do the headphone jack hole. Now it's important that these edges do not actually ever meet the edge of the headphone jack itself. So what I'm going to do is move some stuff out of the way before we get started. So I'm going to need an edge loop. I need 2 edge loops around this headphone jack, and there's not much room to work with. So I'm just going to put 2 in there, and now what I'll do is, because we're really only going to have 3 lines, 3 of these edges actually going through the geometry. Everything else needs to be wrapped around the top. So to be neat, I'm going to try and use these 3 edges here, and we're going to see how this works. So if I select these edges here, I need to also make sure I've got camera based selection on, so that we're only going to actually select the edges that we can see with the camera here and nothing around the other side of the phone. I'm just going to resize these so they go around the top of the headphone jack like that. I'll leave them around about there for a minute. It doesn't need to be perfect yet. And these ones are going to go around the bottom of the headphone jack. So I'm allowed to have 1, go to edge mode, can't select it here, I have 1 edge, the bottommost one will be in the middle, and 1 at the top, and then just 1 at the bottom, and that's really it. So it's quite important, if you can, go from the middle and move everything away from the centermost line that you can find, the centermost edge that you can find, and then it should be a bit neater when it comes to playing with the vertices. So I'll probably stick to edge mode actually, and then just hit R for resize, and then we can bring in these points in a second. What I need to do actually before I continue is add a edge loop down the middle, just there, and then I can go to these vertices here and move them in like this, and that's it. So that now we've got these faces here that we can go ahead and delete. If you want, you can go to these edges here and just sort of expand them a bit just to make it slightly less strenuous, but that's really it. That's all you really need to do. So that's fine for now. Let's just hit 3 to see how this looks, and it looks fine, so there's not a problem there. So let's go ahead and extrude. So double click on the inside edge of the headphone jack, hit extrude, and obviously resize it in a bit. Again, we have to do the topmost bevel manually, so make it as big as you possibly can. That'll do, and move it in slightly like this. Hit G, extrude in even more, and actually on the edge here I'm going to double click on it and go to delete history quick, go to bevel. The whole phone will go green for no reason. One segment should be fine as well for that. Just give it Lambert 1 for a second. Okay, again we're going to do a similar thing for the charging ports here, so I'm going to select these faces, and then duplicate the whole geometry, move it up, select the faces here, hold down shift, delete everything else. Whoops, I need to put on turn camera based selection off. So select the faces I want, that one to that one, shift, delete everything else, move that back down, center pivot, move that back down to the hole. I might want to resize it just a tiny bit for a second. Go to these edges. Actually, you might do it a different way this time. I'm going to move this forward, resize that in. So I think that's about right. That should do it. I could obviously check the image plane to see how big to make this, but obviously it's not completely lined up, but I really don't mind. Long as this is about the same as that, so again I need to make this a bit smaller. That's fine, and then just extrude that down into the phone there. Let's select this edge here, hit extrude, and hit the scale thing there, and just resize that out a bit, just a bit. And I can probably bring this edge in if I want, like that. Okay, going to select that edge and this edge here and hit bevel, and then go to the attribute editor. I think it's poly bevel 2, that's it. And shrink, find out what that bevel is, bring it down a bit. I am going to give it 2 segment for that. Just select the whole object, put it on and soften edge the whole thing, and that'll be fine. Okay, so now if we hit 3 on that and 3 on the phone, it should look quite nice. So what we can do is, this geometry is now sort of getting in the way of our holes. Double click on the edge and W, move it up and out of the way so it's up there, and that's fine. And let's turn our reference image off, turn our cylinders off. We need to duplicate this face for the underside of the phone. If we just hit E and center pivot, if you've already set your rotate option to 45-degree steps there, that's great. And then you can just hit hold down J and rotate it around like that, and then just move it up back to the underside of the phone like that. And then what we'll need to do underneath the phone, we will need to go and delete this hole here. The easiest way of doing that, just hit 1 so you can see what it looks like. Let's isolate select, click on this object, and then in your top view hit isolate select so that we can see it. Obviously it's black because we're seeing the underside, but that's not a problem. Let's select all the faces we want to delete and not select the ones we don't. So I'm selecting all of that, hitting delete. Select all the edges I want to bridge, unselect the ones I don't, and then hit bridge. And now the underside of our phone is now not got a speaker port on it, which is great. The final tutorial is about finishing touches and adding the buttons on the side, and then that's it.